From Green 960 in San Francisco, I'm Beth Greer, and this is your Supernatural Life. This show is part of the Green Morning, heard every Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific. My show is about taking natural living up a notch to supernatural living, and each week I interview top experts who show you ways to live a supernatural life. Well, radiation's in the news a lot since the disaster happened and is still happening in Japan. And I'm bothered by the fact that the emissions coming from the nuclear power plant are really not being talked about in the media very much anymore. What's a safe level of radiation anyway? And did you know that cell phones emit radiation too? How much? Is it safe? Are manufacturers hiding information from us? What does the FCC have to say about it? Plus, we've heard about the studies linking cell phones with brain tumors and then studies that say there is no link. Well, my guest today says that tumors are just the tip of the iceberg, that there's a lot of other things to be concerned about when using cell phones. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Devra Davis when her extraordinary book, The Secret History of the War on Cancer, was released. And then I heard her lecture about the dangers of using cell phones, especially for children and teens, and I asked her to be the very first guest on my radio show last year. Dr. Davis is an award-winning scientist, the first director of the National Academy of Sciences Board of Toxicology and Environmental Studies, professor of preventive medicine at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York, and founder and president of the Environmental Health Trust, a nonprofit devoted to identifying and controlling environmental health hazards. Her newest book, Disconnect: The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation, What the Industry Has Done to Hide It, and How to Protect Your Family, has gotten lots of acclaim and was a top pick for Time magazine. Well, welcome back to your Supernatural Life, Devra.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the important work you're doing.
And same to you. I so appreciate what you're doing. Now, your nonprofit, the Environmental Health Trust, recently launched its global campaign for safer cell phones in a dozen nations. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's based on the fact that most people are unaware that a cell phone is a two-way microwave radio. And as you indicated, it does emit radiation. The radiation from a cell phone is non-ionizing, so it's weaker than the radiation that came out of Japan. But it used to be believed that radiation could not biologically have any effect. We now know this is no longer the case. In fact, it's not been the case for 30 years, although cell phones were regulated with the notion that since they couldn't emit any damaging radiation, we didn't really need to have to worry about their safety at all. In fact, studies have been done in many countries that have shown that cell phone radiation reduces sperm count in healthy men. Wow. We also know that cell phone radiation weakens the blood-brain barrier. The brain needs that barrier to protect it from taking in inappropriate agents. And in fact, cell phone radiation in studies done with animals consistently weakens that barrier, and that's been found so often that neurosurgeons concerned with delivering chemotherapy to the brain have applied cell phone-like radiation in order to deliver chemotherapy into the brain of someone who already has brain cancer.
That is fascinating. That is really fascinating and disturbing all at the same time. Now, you're also, the EHT is urging San Francisco to uphold its right-to-know law on the potential dangers of cell phone radiation. So tell us about that. What is the right-to-know law? And there's intimidation happening, you say, by the CTIA, the Wireless Association. So what's going on with that?
Well, there's actually a remarkable thing happening. San Francisco is, in fact, the center of a major issue here. Does the public have the right to know before they purchase a phone that a phone emits radiation, and does the public have the right to know the number that tells you the amount of radiation estimated according to models developed by computers, approved by the FDA and the FCC? The industry is actually arguing that it's a violation of their First Amendment right to compel them to tell people before they buy a phone that phones emit a certain amount of radiation according to these models. And it's preposterous on its face because for the past 10 years, all phones have been approved in terms of their specific absorption rate. But what has happened here is that the industry gives you the specific absorption rate in fine print after you buy the phone, but they're objecting to making that information available to you before. So you get the information after you buy a phone in fine print packaging that nobody reads, but the San Francisco law says, wait a minute, people have a right to know before they buy the phone that it emits radiation and what the estimated amount of radiation is. Now that they're being compelled to provide that information to the public in fonts that people can read, the industry is saying, well, actually, the specific absorption rate doesn't give you any valid information at all. It's of no use whatsoever. And it's really disingenuous. And
how could they say that it's of no use at all? What are they?
Well, they actually are claiming that if you get a phone with a low specific absorption rate and you use it in an area with a weak signal, you're going to get more exposure into your brain and body than if you get a phone with a high specific absorption rate, otherwise called the SAR, and you use it in an area with a strong signal, because strong signals mean the phone doesn't need to put out more radiation into your brain, and weak signals mean the phones put more radiation out to your brain. Well, that's true, but the whole point is that the public has the right to know all of this. And right now, industry is objecting to the San Francisco law, which requires the right to know that cell phones are two-way microwave radios and that people ought to think about what they're doing. Interestingly, in France and Israel, their laws stipulate that the public knows the SAR before they buy the phone, that the SAR actually be published on the actual phone or the phone package, and that fall phones must be sold with headsets, and people have to be informed that they should be using a phone with a headset and a speakerphone and not hold the phone directly on the body.
So there's a warning actually in Israel and France?
Yes. Yes.
And
this is government warnings. This is government warnings.
And yes. So where can people find out the SAR rating of their phones? Do they have to, is there a place online that?
Well, Environmental Working Group did a good job of publishing the SARs some time ago, but if you just type in your phone and SAR, you'll find it eventually. But the fact of the matter is that this information is not available to the public widely, and it's being withheld from them. People have a right to know that cell phones emit microwave radiation.
Well, they certainly do have a right to know.
Right.
Now, you testified before a U.S. Senate panel about the dangers of cell phone use. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was very interesting. I talked to Senator Harkin and Senator Specter, and I talked about the fact that we ought to put $1 a phone fee on phones to create a massive training and research program, because the United States has almost no research underway to monitor whether or not people are having reactions to cell phones. And right now I'm working on a case series report of 12 men with brain cancers, and each one of them started out using a cell phone at least 10 years, sometimes 20 years earlier, and using the phones regularly held next to their brain. And that's the one thing that unites these cases is regular, heavy cell phone use. The most recent person I talked to just yesterday is Milton Marks, who's a very well-known member of the San Francisco community, a distinguished person who was formerly the president of the City University of San Francisco. Unfortunately, he is now struggling well with a brain tumor.
Awful.
And he and I spoke yesterday about his own conviction that his brain tumor was tied with his use of a cell phone, which he was basically glued to for, unfortunately, a decade. And there are more and more cases of that are coming forward. And I think it's important for people to understand cell phones save lives. They've revolutionized the way we do business, but we've got to be smart about how we use them.
Right. So give us some tips about how we can use them.
Do not keep a cell phone in your pocket of your shirt or your pants. Men who keep cell phones in their pockets 4 hours a day have half the sperm count of others, according to studies done at the Cleveland Clinic by distinguished researcher Ashok Agrawal, as well as studies done in Australia by a director of the National Center for Biotechnology, John Aitken, as well as studies done in Greece and Turkey on men who have used cell phones. All of them confirm that men who keep cell phones close to their bodies, in their front pockets in particular, have reduced sperm count. And if you take samples of sperm from men and put it in test tubes and expose one sample to cell phone radiation and do not expose the other sample, you will find an exposed sample will die 3 times faster.
Wow. Now, have they done studies on women?
There have not been many studies done on women, but there are studies done on rodents in laboratories in Turkey and Greece, and I'll be talking with those researchers at the end of this month about that work. And what they have shown is that exposure prenatally affects the health of the babies that are produced to rodents. They've even shown this with fruit flies as well. So cell phone radiation is weak. It doesn't necessarily kill anything right away, but it can deform and damage the offspring of rodents that are exposed to cell phone radiation early in pregnancy.
Interesting, because I'm concerned. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and she just got a phone this year. She uses it mostly for texting. I don't allow her to put it up to her ear, unless she. But the thing is that she carries it around in her pocket, and
no, that is not a good idea. She can put it in her pocket if it's turned off or on airplane mode. And the one thing I'm most concerned about is that people are giving phones to babies, literally.
Yes, I know, it's
with
insane.
All of these applications for babies
to
soothe them, to go to sleep, to let them play, to teach them how to read. If you, for one reason or another, decide you need to give your child an electronic game to play from your phone, then disconnect your phone from the wireless. Babies and young children should not be holding wireless devices next to their brain. The question really is distance. You don't want to keep a phone next to the brain because the brain of a child is developing. Their skulls are thinner, their brains have more fluid, and as a consequence, they are much more vulnerable to the damaging impact of cell phone radiation.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit more tips. I want to know about the Volkov brain glucose study. Maybe you can enlighten us about that. So we'll be right back.